buried it so that you could get it later.
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
That he know that Will Smith, Jaden, he Bryshere and he Nicki Minaj, and you know it, Bilal. Now I don't give no how far in the desert you run. You'll go from a Philly nigga to a sand, but they'll still get you.
He said, you know Will me, you know Diddy made me suck his penis. You know what's going on. You know Charlie made me suck. Well, I'm gonna give you a chapter from the book since I owed you something.
Okay.
In the book, in one of the chapters, it talk about mentorship.
Do you have a girlfriend?
No.
But you have a lot of associates, is what we call them.
Yeah, I have a lot of associates. I don't discriminate women. I don't, ladies.
An actor known for his role in the hit television series Empire is facing charges.
Nicki Minaj is on a warpath, and this time, the smoke isn't just about rap beef. It's about a dark, hidden reality that's been rotting the core of Hollywood for decades. As the queen of rap shatters the silence with cryptic warnings about ritualistic sacrifices and satanic cults, the world is finally looking closer at the tragic downfall of Empire star Bryshere Gray. For years, we watched Hakeem Lyon rule the screen, but behind the scenes, a much more sinister story was unfolding, one involving some of the biggest names in the industry: Will Smith, Jada Pinkett Smith, Diddy, and the legendary Charlie Mack. From shocking allegations of freak-offs that allegedly lasted for days, to a mother accused of selling her son for a failed book deal, the details coming to light are nothing short of a nightmare. Whistleblowers like Jaguar, Wright, and Will Smith's former assistant, Bilal, are now breaking their silence, painting a haunting picture of mentorship turned into a personal playground of abuse. Is Bryshere Gray the latest victim of a system designed to break young talent for power? Today, we're peeling back the curtain on the industry's most disturbing secret. This isn't just gossip. It's a desperate look at a fallen star and the powerful moguls accused of pulling the strings. The rise of Bryshere Gray, better known to the world as Hakeem Lyon, was supposed to be the ultimate Hollywood success story. A kid from the streets of West Philly, discovered by the legendary Charlie Mack, and thrust into the spotlight of the biggest musical drama in television history, Empire. But as the old saying goes, all that glitters isn't gold. And in the case of Bryshere Gray, the glitter was actually a shroud for a much darker reality. Today, we're diving into the mentorship trap, where we explore how a young man's dreams were allegedly traded for industry access, and how the very people who were supposed to protect him are now being accused of his destruction. To understand the tragedy of Bryshere Gray, we have to look at the gatekeepers. In the entertainment world, especially within the Philly to Hollywood pipeline, one name carries immense weight: Charlie Mack. Known as the first son of Philadelphia, Charlie Mack has been a fix-it man, a bodyguard, and a mentor to some of the biggest stars in the world, most notably Will Smith. For decades, Mack has been the bridge between the streets and the boardrooms. So, when he took a young Bryshere under his wing, the world thought the boy had hit the jackpot. Mack wasn't just a manager, he was portrayed as a father figure. But according to whistleblowers like Jaguar Wright, this mentorship was the beginning of the end. Jaguar Wright, a soul singer who has become the industry's most controversial truth-teller, has been shouting from the rooftops about what happened to Bryshere for years. Long before the headlines about his arrests or his mental health spirals, Jaguar claimed that Charlie Mack didn't just manage Bryshere, he tuned him up and handed him over. She alleges that Bryshere was placed into a specific pass-around network designed to satisfy the appetites of Hollywood's elite. The most shocking part of her claim? That this wasn't done behind his family's back. Jaguar alleges that Bryshere's own mother was fully aware and even complicit, allegedly trading her son's well-being for a check and a book deal that never even took off. Imagine being 17 years old, talented, and full of hope, only to realize that the people you trust most see you as a commodity. This is where the names Will Smith and Jada Pinkett Smith enter the narrative in a way that fans never expected. For years, the Smiths have been seen as the royal family of Black Hollywood, but recent allegations suggest a much more complex and disturbing dynamic behind closed doors. Bilal, Will Smith's former assistant, recently broke his silence, echoing Jaguar's claims. He spoke of a time in Chicago when Bryshere allegedly broke down in tears, admitting that he was being used by the industry's power players. The term mentorship in Hollywood often carries a double meaning. For some, it's a pathway to success. For others, it's a puffy-flavored camp. This is a reference to the infamous stories surrounding Sean Diddy Combs. We've heard the stories of Usher being sent to live with Diddy at the age of 14 to learn the business. While Usher has hinted that he saw things a child should never see, the allegations regarding Bryshere Gray are far more graphic. Whistleblowers suggest that Bryshere was subjected to freak-offs, long, drug-fueled parties that lasted for days, where young men were allegedly coerced into acts they never consented to. Jaguar Wright describes these scenes with chilling detail. She speaks of freak-offs that became so intense, so physically and mentally draining, that Bryshere would try to escape. But according to her, there was no way out. She describes him being dragged back, much like the disturbing footage we've seen or heard about in other high-profile cases. She even goes as far as to claim that Meek Mill was caught in the same web, alleging that both young men were once seen running out of a mogul's house, terrified and unclothed, screaming for help after being held for hours against their will. Why would anyone stay? Why wouldn't they just go to the police? The answer lies in the power of the man card. In a recent, deeply controversial interview, Terrence Howard, Bryshere's on-screen father from Empire, spoke about the psychological toll of these industry practices. Without naming names directly, Howard talked about young men giving up their man card for fame and acting deals. He suggested that once a man is exploited in this way, he loses a part of his spiritual energy that he can never get back. While some criticized his comments as being insensitive, many saw it as a coded confirmation of what was happening on the set of Empire. Howard seemed to be describing a broken version of the young man he once knew. And then there are the receipts. Jaguar Wright has claimed that there is a video in existence that would end careers, a tape involving Bryshere, Justin Bieber, and Jaden Smith. She alleges that this tape shows these young stars in a compromised, out-of-it state while being handled by older industry figures. According to her, the threat of releasing this tape is what has kept Bryshere silent. When he allegedly tried to file a $50 million lawsuit against his mentors, the narrative was immediately flipped. Suddenly, reports started surfacing about his mental health issues, his bipolar disorder, and his ADHD. This is a classic Hollywood tactic, the crazy label. If a victim speaks out, the industry's PR machine works overtime to make them look unstable. If you can convince the public that someone is wilding out or losing their mind, then any truth they tell becomes the ramblings of a sick person. We saw this with Bryshere's bizarre social media posts, his sudden pivot to adult content platforms, and his increasingly erratic behavior in public. But was he crazy, or was he a young man suffering from severe PTSD after years of alleged systemic abuse? The pressure of living a double life, being a superstar by day and a plaything by night, would break anyone. For Bryshere, the cracks began to show early. While the world saw Hakeem Lyon's arrogance and charm, his real-life counterpart was reportedly drowning. The mentorship he was promised turned out to be a cage, and as the money started to dry up and the roles stopped coming, the people who claimed to be his family vanished. In this first part of our investigation, we see a pattern of exploitation that targets the young, the talented, and the vulnerable. It's a system that relies on silence, shame, and the complicity of those closest to the victim. But the silence is finally breaking, with Nicki Minaj now adding her voice to the chorus of those calling out industry rituals and sacrifices. The spotlight is brighter than ever. As we move forward, we have to ask, what happened when Bryshere finally reached his breaking point? How did a $50 million lawsuit disappear into thin air? And what is the truth behind those terrifying calls to his home that involved the SWAT team? The story of Bryshere Gray is a warning to every young artist dreaming of the big leagues. Because in Hollywood, the price of admission might be more than you're willing to pay. While the public saw Bryshere Gray as the prince of a television empire, the alleged reality behind closed doors was a landscape of exploitation and control. In The Freak-Offs and the $50 Million Secret, we dive into the most explosive claims that have surfaced. Claims that link some of the biggest names in Hollywood to a cycle of abuse that sounds more like a horror movie than a mentorship. The name Will Smith used to represent the pinnacle of Hollywood integrity, but according to his former assistant, Bilal, the curtain is being pulled back. Bilal has gone on record with some of the most disturbing allegations to date. He describes a breakdown in Chicago where Bryshere Gray allegedly confessed the unthinkable. According to Bilal, Bryshere was in tears, admitting that Diddy, Will Smith, and Charlie Mack had used him for sexual favors. Bilal claims Bryshere told him directly, "You know, Will, Diddy made me suck. You know what's going on." These aren't just rumors. These are first-hand accounts from people who were inside the camp. But it wasn't just about Will and Diddy. The allegations suggest a much larger, more coordinated effort to keep young men under control. Enter the concept of the freak-off. Recently brought to the forefront by Cassie's lawsuit against Diddy, these freak-offs were described as grueling, multi-day sexual performances fueled by substances. Jaguar, Wright, and Bilal allege that Bryshere wasn't just a guest at these events. He was a victim. Jaguar claims that one specific instance involved Bryshere and Meek Mill running out of Will Smith's house, terrified and screaming for help, because the Smiths allegedly had them in a freak-off for hours, with no intention of stopping. Perhaps the most chilling part of these claims involves Jada Pinkett Smith. While the world focused on entanglements, whistleblowers like Bilal suggest Jada played a much more strategic role. He alleges that Jada is the one who holds the recordings. According to these claims, there are tapes of these freak-offs, and Jada allegedly uses them as leverage. Bilal even mentions a tape where Jada can supposedly be heard in the background, giving disturbing instructions during an act involving Bryshere. These tapes are the ultimate insurance policy in Hollywood, a way to ensure that no one ever steps out of line. And then there's the Tyrese Gibson connection. Fans remember the bizarre moment when Tyrese claimed on social media that Will and Jada gave him $5 million to help with his legal fees during his custody battle. While the Smiths team later denied this, many in the industry believe this was hush money disguised as a donation. Why would a superstar like Tyrese, who has his own fame and fortune, be so erratic and desperate? According to Jaguar, Wright, Tyrese was part of this same network, and his emotional breakdowns are the result of the same trauma that broke Bryshere. When Bryshere Gray allegedly tried to fight back, the system hit him with everything it had. There are reports that Bryshere attempted to file a $50 million lawsuit against Will Smith and Diddy for SA that allegedly occurred when he was just 17 years old. But a lawsuit of that magnitude requires money, support, and a stable reputation. Things Bryshere was rapidly losing. Jaguar, Wright claims that someone within the industry threatened him into pulling the lawsuit back. The threat was simple. If he moved forward, they would release the tapes to slime him out and make him feel too embarrassed to ever show his face again. Jaguar, Wright hasn't been shy about mentioning names. She alleges that one of the receipts Bryshere intended to use was a tape that didn't just feature him, but also Justin Bieber and Jaden Smith. She claims these young men were visibly out of it, on camera, while being exploited by the moguls. If these tapes exist, they represent a level of systemic corruption that would dismantle the entire industry. This is likely why the mental health narrative was pushed so heavily. By the time Bryshere could have made a move, he was already being branded as bipolar and unstable. The tragedy here is the isolation. Imagine knowing that your mentors, your industry parents, and even your mother are all allegedly profiting from your pain. Bryshere's mother has been accused by Jaguar of watching her son be tossed and drilled in exchange for a check and a book deal. If true, it means Bryshere had nowhere to turn. He was trapped in a pass-around network where his talent was just a lure to get him into the room. As Bryshere's career began to stall and his mental state deteriorated, the industry did what it does best. It moved on to the next victim. But the trauma didn't go away. It manifested in the legal troubles, the domestic incidents, and the terrifying SWAT standoffs that would eventually define his life. In the next part, we will look at the direct consequences of this alleged abuse. We'll break down the 2020 arrest, the chilling interrogation footage where Bryshere seems to be living in a different reality, and the cryptic tweets from Nicki Minaj that many believe are the final nail in the coffin for these Hollywood moguls. The industry thinks they've silenced Bryshere Gray, but as Nicki says, the jig is up. The deeper we look into the life of Bryshere Gray, the more it feels like a tragic script that was written long before he ever stepped onto the set of Empire. In The Rituals and the Breaking Point, we explore how the alleged systemic abuse finally manifested in a public collapse, and why Nicki Minaj's recent cryptic warnings have sent shockwaves through the industry, leading many to believe that the jig is finally up. For years, the industry kept a tight lid on Bryshere's situation, but the human psyche can only take so much before it fractures. In July 2020, the world watched in real time as the Hakeem Lion persona completely dissolved. It started at 10:15 p.m. on a Sunday night in Goodyear, Arizona. A woman, identified as Bryshere's wife, fled their home in a state of pure terror. She flagged down a stranger at a gas station, her face bruised and her spirit broken. She told police a harrowing story, that she had been assaulted for hours and strangled to the point of losing consciousness. When the police arrived at Bryshere's home, they didn't find a superstar. They found a man barricaded in his own reality. It took a 9-hour standoff involving a full SWAT team and crisis negotiators to finally get him to surrender. But it was the footage that followed that truly chilled the public. In the interrogation videos, Bryshere didn't seem like a violent criminal. He seemed like someone who was no longer there. His words were erratic, his stories made no sense, and he appeared to be fighting internal battles that the officers couldn't see. Was this just a mental health crisis, as the industry PR teams claimed? Or was it the result of years of being passed around by the moguls who promised to mentor him? Whistleblowers like Jaguar, Wright, and Bilal argue that this was the inevitable result of the trauma he endured. They suggest that the industry didn't just break his career, they broke his mind. And as Bryshere spiraled, the same industry that once cheered him on began to treat him like a ritualistic sacrifice, someone to be used, discarded, and then mocked as a cautionary tale. This is where the queen of rap, Nicki Minaj, enters the conversation. Nicki has never been one to bite her tongue, but her recent social media rants have taken a much more spiritual and sinister tone. While she didn't name Bryshere directly, the timing and the content of her messages were too specific to ignore. Nicki began tweeting about powerful people practicing rituals in satanic cults. She spoke about how these elites take small people to slime them up as a form of sacrifice to stay at the top. She even used the phrase red juice, implying that the industry's success is fueled by the literal and figurative blood of the vulnerable. On the night of the Grammys, an event often cited by conspiracy theorists as a hub for industry rituals, Nicki put out a disturbing warning. As they do their ritual tonight, God Almighty will reveal himself to them. The ritual will backfire on them. To those following the Bryshere Gray story, this sounded like a direct shot at the moguls mentioned by Jaguar Wright. If, as Bilal and Jaguar claim, there are tapes of these freak-offs and sacrifices, then Nicki's words suggest that the spiritual and legal protection these moguls once had is finally evaporating. The connection becomes even clearer when you look at the names Nicki has called out: Meek Mill, Jay-Z, Diddy, and Will Smith. These are the same men linked to Bryshere's alleged mentorship program. Nicki's outrage seems to stem from the fact that everyone in the circle turned a blind eye while young talent was being exploited. She isn't just fighting for herself anymore. She seems to be trying to burn down the entire structure that allowed Bryshere Gray to fall through the cracks. But the industry's response remains the same: the mental health card. Even as recently as 2025, when new assault charges surfaced against Bryshere in Virginia, the narrative shifted immediately to his interesting mental health issues. His associates claim he wouldn't survive in jail and needs mental help. While this may be true, it conveniently ignores the cause of the illness. You don't just go crazy after reaching the top of Hollywood. Something or someone has to break you. Terrence Howard's words about the man card echo through every one of these incidents. When you lose your right to be a man, when you are used against your will, and when you are forced into freak-offs for the entertainment of your masters, the spiritual energy Howard spoke of is extinguished. Bryshere Gray is a living, breathing example of what happens when the industry's flavor camp goes wrong. He was supposed to be the next Usher, the next big thing from Philly. Instead, he became a personal plaything for men who hid their devil-in-disguise personas behind philanthropy and movie roles. The most heartbreaking part of the Bryshere Gray saga is that he tried to fight back. The $50 million lawsuit he supposedly considered filing was his attempt to reclaim his power. But without money, without a platform, and with the threat of slime tapes hanging over his head, he was silenced. The industry didn't just take his money, they took his voice. However, as the investigations into Diddy and other major players intensify, the wall of silence is crumbling. The police calls, the SWAT standoffs, and the erratic social media posts are finally being seen for what they truly are: cries for help from a victim of a systemic pass-around network. Nicki Minaj's tweets aren't just rants. They are the alarm bells for an industry that is about to face its day of judgment. The story of Bryshere Gray is a dark mirror held up to Hollywood. It shows us that for every star that rises, there is a cost. And sometimes that cost is a young man's soul. The world is finally demanding an investigation, not just into Bryshere's actions, but into the men who were in the room with him. As the truth about the freak-offs and the rituals comes to light, the question isn't if Bryshere Gray will be vindicated. It's who else is going to fall when the final tape is played. The tragedy of Bryshere Gray is a stark reminder that the entertainment industry isn't always what it seems. Behind the glitz, the glamour, and the platinum records lies a world of mentorships that look more like traps and rituals that demand everything from those who enter. Whether you believe the whistleblowers like Jaguar, Wright, and Bilal, or you're waiting for the tapes to finally drop, one thing is clear: the conversation about industry abuse is no longer being silenced. But we want to hear from you. Do you think Bryshere Gray is a victim of a systemic pass-around network? Or is this a case of a young star losing his way due to mental health? Do you believe Nicki Minaj is truly exposing the industry? Or is this just another Twitter rant? And most importantly, who do you think is the next mogul to face the music? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and don't hold back. We're reading every single one. If you found this deep dive eye-opening, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. We're committed to bringing you the stories the mainstream media is too afraid to touch. Click the bell icon so you never miss an update as this story continues to unfold. Thanks for watching, and stay woke.